Throughout history, countless individuals have claimed to experience an extraordinary phenomenon, hearing the voice of God. These experiences are often described as transformative, filling the person with a profound sense of awe, purpose, and sometimes even fear. The idea that God might speak directly to humanity is both awe-inspiring and mysterious, raising questions about why certain people receive these messages and how they shape the lives of those who hear them. This topic explores the mystery and meaning behind these accounts, diving into real-life stories, biblical references, and theological perspectives on divine communication. One of the most famous examples of God's voice in the Bible is the story of Moses and the burning bush. Moses hears God call to him from within the flames, commissioning him to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. This encounter is both vivid and purposeful, leaving no doubt in Moses' mind that he's been given a divine mission. Similarly, in the New Testament, Saul, later known as Paul, hears God's voice on the road to Damascus, forever changing his life and purpose. These biblical accounts are foundational to the faith and have inspired many to believe that God's voice is real and active. In modern times, people from various backgrounds claim to have heard God's voice, each with unique experiences and messages. Some describe a soft, reassuring voice during times of crisis, guiding them towards safety or helping them find inner peace. Others recall a louder, more authoritative voice delivering clear instructions or warnings. A common thread in these stories is the life-changing impact of the encounter. Those who hear God's voice often emerge with a renewed sense of purpose, conviction, or understanding that profoundly affects their lives. Psychologists and theologians have long debated the nature of these experiences. Some attribute them to psychological phenomena, while others see them as genuine encounters with the divine. Interestingly, research on this subject suggests that hearing God's voice often correlates with strong religious faith, indicating that belief might open individuals to experiencing such communication. However, many believers argue that faith alone cannot explain these encounters' personal, often inexplicable details. The mystery deepens when considering why God's voice is heard by some and not others. Are these people chosen for a particular purpose? Are they more attuned to the divine, or are these moments of divine intervention meant to inspire all who hear about them? Such questions invite reflection on the nature of faith, purpose, and divine communication. Exploring this topic allows us to examine the profound ways in which the experience of hearing God's voice impacts lives, giving strength in moments of despair, courage in times of fear, and clarity amidst confusion. Whether these experiences stem from divine intervention or the depths of the human psyche, the mystery of God's voice remains a powerful testament to faith, filling those who hear it with a lasting sense of hope and purpose. The phenomenon of hearing God's voice is not only a deeply personal experience but also a spiritually significant one. For many, hearing God's voice marks a pivotal moment in their spiritual journey, leading to a deepened faith or a significant life change. This concept, while mysterious and awe-inspiring, challenges the boundaries of human understanding, leaving us to ponder whether these encounters are purely divine, psychological, or perhaps a combination of both. One compelling aspect of hearing God's voice is the context in which it often occurs. Many people report hearing God's voice in moments of great personal turmoil or in times of profound life decisions. These are often moments when individuals feel overwhelmed or directionless, and the voice offers not only comfort but a sense of clarity and purpose. The nature of the message varies. Some hear a call to action, while others receive words of encouragement or warnings of danger. The immediate emotional response to these experiences is often one of peace, understanding, or conviction, as if the individual is being reassured of their place in God's plan. From a psychological perspective, experiences of hearing God's voice can be viewed through the lens of auditory hallucinations or altered states of consciousness. Some scientists suggest that extreme emotional distress, isolation, or spiritual yearning can cause the mind to project voices or messages that are interpreted as divine. These psychological theories, while grounded in research, don't necessarily negate the spiritual impact of the experience, as individuals often describe the messages as deeply meaningful and life-altering. The experience is not just a mere auditory occurrence, but a profound spiritual event that resonates with the soul and leaves a lasting imprint on the person's life. Moreover, hearing God's voice often challenges traditional notions of communication and connection with the divine. In most religious traditions, the idea of a personal relationship with God is abstract, something that can be experienced through prayer, worship, or scripture. But hearing God's voice adds a concrete, tangible dimension to this relationship. For the person who hears it, it becomes an undeniable experience of divine intimacy. It's as if God is directly involved in their life, speaking not through a prophet or scripture, but in an immediate, personal way. This creates a deeper sense of connection to the divine, one that can profoundly shape their worldview and faith. Interestingly, while many people report positive, life-affirming experiences, some also describe hearing God's voice in moments of great fear or awe. In these instances, the voice may convey a sense of divine judgment or a warning to change one's ways. This duality of the voice, both comforting and admonishing, suggests that the voice of God is not one-dimensional but rather reflects the complexity of the divine. Whether the voice is offering guidance or a challenge, the experience can bring about significant spiritual growth and self-awareness. Another aspect to explore is how individuals interpret and respond to hearing God's voice. Some may feel called to take drastic steps in their lives, changing careers, ending toxic relationships, or embarking on a mission. Others may simply feel a renewed sense of peace or clarity in their existing circumstances. The effect of hearing God's voice varies from person to person, but what's common in these experiences is the undeniable impact they have on shaping one's faith and life path. Ultimately, the mystery of hearing God's voice remains one of the most intriguing aspects of spiritual experience. Whether these encounters are divine messages, psychological phenomena, or both, they serve as powerful reminders of the potential for transcendence and the profound ways in which the divine may choose to communicate with humanity. For those who experience it, hearing God's voice becomes a testament to the active presence of God in the world, creating a deep sense of reverence, awe, and gratitude. The phenomenon of hearing God's voice is not only mysterious but also deeply transformative, often altering the course of an individual's life in ways that are difficult to fully comprehend. One of the most fascinating aspects of this experience is the profound effect it has on the individual's sense of purpose and identity. For many, hearing God's voice offers a sense of divine validation or confirmation of their life's direction, something beyond human understanding. It can be seen as a spiritual awakening or a calling that gives their life new meaning and a higher purpose. These individuals often feel a renewed sense of clarity about their role in the world, whether it's in service to others, spreading a message, or simply finding peace in their personal lives. However, the experience also raises questions about the nature of divine communication. Is it an act of grace, where God speaks directly to those He has chosen? Or is it, as some theologians suggest, a sign of spiritual preparedness, a moment when the person is ready to hear God's call, whether or not they recognize it as such at first? This leads us to wonder whether hearing God's voice is reserved for a select few, or if everyone, at some point, might be open to such an experience, depending on their faith, spiritual readiness, and personal life circumstances. Some have speculated that God's voice is heard more clearly in times of intense personal trials or deep emotional struggles. These challenging moments often strip away the distractions of the world, forcing individuals to confront their own vulnerability and need for guidance. It is during these fragile times that people may be more open, more receptive to the divine. The voice they hear might serve as both comfort and a source of strength, calling them to persevere through hardship or offering them a path out of their suffering. From this perspective, hearing God's voice becomes not only a form of divine communication but also an essential means of emotional and spiritual healing. In addition, hearing God's voice also introduces a powerful paradox, the idea that God's communication is both deeply personal and universally accessible. While hearing the voice may seem like an intimate, one-on-one encounter, there is a wider spiritual context at play. People from different walks of life, across cultures, and in varying circumstances, report similar types of experiences, where they feel called to specific actions or receive divine comfort and wisdom. This suggests that God's voice is not a random, arbitrary phenomenon, but something that reflects a deeper, universal spiritual truth that transcends individual experience. For some, this might bring a sense of unity with the global community of believers, reinforcing the idea that God's messages are intended not just for the individual but for the greater good of humanity. Interestingly, these encounters also highlight the mystery of divine timing. Often, people describe the voice they heard as being perfectly timed, offering guidance just when they needed it most. Whether in moments of doubt, fear, or uncertainty, hearing God's voice can serve as a beacon of hope and clarity. It can be a moment when everything aligns, and the individual is able to move forward with renewed faith and confidence. This mysterious timing adds to the sense that God's presence is always near, actively involved in the lives of those who seek Him, and perhaps even those who don't. There's also the question of the internal conflict that some experience after hearing God's voice. For some, the message can be clear and undeniable, but the personal implications of following that voice may not always align with their own desires or life goals. This can create a tension, a struggle between personal will and divine direction. The experience of hearing God's voice may not always come with an immediate sense of peace, as it often challenges individuals to change, grow, and step outside of their comfort zones. Yet, the call to obedience and trust in the divine process is an essential part of the transformative journey that follows. Finally, it's worth considering the role of faith in these experiences. For many who hear God's voice, it isn't just the act of hearing that is significant, but the accompanying belief that God is, indeed, speaking to them. This faith shapes their understanding of the encounter and provides a framework for interpreting the message they receive. Whether the voice is heard audibly, as some claim, or in a more subtle, spiritual form, the experience often affirms the individual's belief in a God who is active and involved in their lives, guiding them toward their true purpose. Faith, then, becomes both the lens through which the experience is understood and the means through which the transformative power of God's voice is fully embraced. The mystery of hearing God's voice remains an awe-inspiring element of the human spiritual experience. It evokes questions about divine purpose, human readiness, and the nature of communication with the divine. Whether viewed through a psychological lens or a spiritual one, these encounters challenge the boundaries of what we understand about God's relationship with humanity. For those who have experienced it, hearing God's voice is more than a mystical event. It is a deeply personal and life-altering experience that reshapes their understanding of themselves, their faith, and their place in God's plan. As we continue to explore the mystery of hearing God's voice, it's important to reflect on the broader spiritual implications these encounters have on both the individual and the community. While hearing God's voice may seem like an intensely personal experience, many people report that it often leads to a deeper sense of connection with others. This can be especially true when the message received is one of service, compassion, or love. For example, someone who hears God's voice may feel led to help others, offer forgiveness, or take steps to heal broken relationships. These calls to action often prompt a ripple effect, where one individual's obedience to God's voice leads to positive changes in the lives of others. Furthermore, such encounters can encourage a more profound commitment to faith. When people believe they have heard God speak directly to them, it strengthens their spiritual journey and deepens their sense of trust in God's guidance. This renewed faith often leads to a desire to cultivate a more intimate relationship with God, one that goes beyond traditional religious practices. Many who have had such experiences report that they seek out more time for prayer, reflection, and meditation, yearning to listen for God's voice again and to remain open to His will. This active listening becomes a lifelong practice, shaping their daily decisions, interactions, and overall approach to life. The transformative power of hearing God's voice also extends to the way individuals approach their fears and doubts. For those who have experienced deep struggles or feelings of abandonment, the voice of God serves as a reassuring reminder that they are not alone. The comfort that comes from hearing a divine voice is unparalleled, offering peace in the midst of uncertainty. For example, in times of personal loss or suffering, the voice of God might provide a message of hope or a sense of reassurance that everything will ultimately be okay, regardless of the circumstances. This can shift the individual's mindset, replacing fear with faith, and instilling a calm resolve in the face of adversity. Moreover, hearing God's voice often leads individuals to reevaluate their understanding of the world and their place in it. For those who hear the voice in a deeply spiritual context, it can challenge them to live with greater intentionality and purpose. They might begin to see their daily interactions and decisions as part of a larger, divine plan. This perception can alter their approach to everything from career choices to relationships to how they spend their time. The experience of hearing God's voice often brings a sense of clarity, allowing people to prioritize what truly matters and let go of distractions or superficial pursuits. They may be driven by a renewed commitment to align their lives more closely with God's will, seeking out ways to serve and contribute to the world around them. Additionally, the idea that hearing God's voice could be an invitation to deepen one's spiritual understanding or purpose ties into the broader theological concept of vocation. Many individuals who claim to have heard God's voice describe how they were called to specific actions or missions, such as pursuing a career in ministry, engaging in acts of social justice, or dedicating themselves to personal transformation. These calls to vocation, as some believe, are not just a coincidence but a divine nudge toward fulfilling God's intended purpose for their lives. This sense of purpose often brings clarity and direction, guiding individuals toward a life that aligns with their deepest values and spiritual convictions. It's also worth considering how the experience of hearing God's voice can shift an individual's perspective on life after death. Many who have experienced direct encounters with the divine report a greater sense of peace about the afterlife, feeling as though God has assured them of His presence and care beyond this life. This shift in perspective often brings with it a greater fearlessness toward death and an understanding of life's temporal nature. Hearing God's voice can reassure believers that death is not an end, but a transition into something greater, reinforcing faith in the promises of eternity. In the wider context of faith communities, the idea of hearing God's voice can also serve as a means of unification. While each individual's experience may differ, there's a shared understanding that God speaks to those who are open to His guidance. Stories of hearing God's voice can inspire others within faith communities to strengthen their spiritual practices, embrace a life of deeper faith, and seek God's guidance in their own lives. This shared experience can bond individuals together, creating a sense of collective faith and a deeper trust in God's ongoing work in the world. Lastly, as much as hearing God's voice can be a deeply personal and transformative experience, it also reinforces the idea that God's communication with humanity is ongoing. Many people who have heard God's voice report that the messages they received are not one-time events, but part of an ongoing dialogue. This idea of continuous communication suggests that God is always present, always guiding, and always offering wisdom, even when His voice is not directly heard. It reinforces the notion that God's will for our lives is constantly unfolding, and our role is to remain attentive and receptive to His guidance as we move through life. In the end, the mystery of hearing God's voice invites us to consider the dynamic nature of our relationship with the divine. Whether these experiences are understood as divine communication, psychological phenomena, or a combination of both, they profoundly impact those who experience them. These encounters invite believers to reflect on their faith, purpose, and divine calling, ultimately deepening their understanding of God's love, grace, and presence in their lives. The mystery, while never fully explained, continues to inspire awe, wonder, and reverence, reminding us that God's ways are indeed higher than our own. As we delve deeper into the significance of hearing God's voice, it's important to acknowledge the role of spiritual discernment in these experiences. For many individuals, distinguishing between divine communication and other mental or emotional stimuli can be challenging. The question arises, how do we know that the voice we hear is truly from God? In a world full of noise, both literal and figurative, it takes practice, prayer, and spiritual maturity to discern the authenticity of the messages we receive. This process of discernment often involves examining the message's alignment with Scripture, the fruit it bears in our lives, and whether it promotes love, peace, and godly wisdom. For some, hearing God's voice is a gradual process, where the clarity and certainty of His messages grow over time as they learn to recognize His voice among others. Interestingly, the idea of hearing God's voice also introduces the concept of silence and solitude. In our fast-paced world, it's increasingly difficult to find moments of stillness where we can listen attentively to the divine. Yet, many who claim to have heard God's voice emphasize the importance of silence in cultivating an environment where this communication can take place. Silence is not simply the absence of sound, but a space where the soul can attune itself to God's presence. In such moments of solitude, individuals often experience profound clarity, as if the noise of the world has faded, allowing them to hear God's voice more distinctly. This highlights a critical spiritual discipline, the ability to quiet our hearts and minds in order to truly listen for God's guidance. It challenges the modern notion that we must always be busy or distracted, instead urging us to embrace moments of quiet reflection where divine communication can flourish. Furthermore, the experience of hearing God's voice is often intertwined with the development of trust. Trusting that God's voice is real, that it is for our good, and that it will lead us on the right path requires a level of surrender. This surrender is not passive, but an active choice to relinquish control and place our lives in God's hands. In hearing God's voice, believers may feel a profound sense of peace and confidence, as though they are being guided by something far greater than themselves. This sense of divine guidance can inspire greater faith and dependence on God, encouraging individuals to step out of their comfort zones and embrace new opportunities or challenges that may seem daunting without His assurance. Another aspect to explore is the broader theological implications of God speaking directly to individuals. Some may argue that God's voice was a unique phenomenon in biblical times, restricted to the patriarchs, prophets, and apostles. Others, however, believe that God continues to communicate with His people today, not just through Scripture but through personal experiences. This ongoing communication suggests a relational God, one who desires to be intimately involved in the lives of His followers. It reflects a deeper truth about God's nature. He is not distant or detached, but present, speaking to His people with care and intentionality. This relational aspect of God's voice invites believers into a dynamic, living relationship with Him, rather than a static or ritualistic understanding of faith. The experience of hearing God's voice also has the power to heal. Many individuals who have felt abandoned or rejected either by people or by God Himself describe hearing His voice as an antidote to that pain. God's voice can restore brokenness, bringing healing to emotional wounds or feelings of inadequacy. For those who have suffered trauma or loss, the voice of God may be a reminder of His love and His unwavering presence, even in the darkest of times. This healing process goes beyond words. It touches the soul, bringing comfort and assurance that we are never alone, no matter what we face. On a communal level, the idea of God speaking to individuals has the potential to strengthen the collective faith of a church or spiritual community. As people share their personal stories of hearing God's voice, it can inspire others to seek a deeper relationship with God and to listen more intently for His direction. When one person shares a testimony of how God's voice led them through a difficult situation or provided clarity on a life decision, it reinforces the truth that God is actively involved in the lives of His followers. These shared experiences can serve as encouragement and affirmation, bolstering the faith of those who may not yet have had such encounters. In this way, the voice of God becomes a unifying force, connecting believers across time and space, fostering a sense of shared divine presence. One of the most powerful outcomes of hearing God's voice is its potential to lead individuals into a life of obedience. When God speaks, the message often carries a sense of urgency and purpose, calling individuals to act. For many, the clarity of this divine communication prompts immediate action. This action might involve a change in lifestyle, a decision to help others, or an important step in fulfilling one's spiritual calling. Obedience to God's voice requires courage, as it may lead individuals into uncharted territory, away from the familiar and into the unknown. Yet, the act of following God's guidance, no matter how challenging, often brings peace, knowing that they are walking in alignment with His will. The result is a life that reflects the transformative power of divine guidance, one marked by purpose, integrity, and a deeper connection to God's plan. Finally, the experience of hearing God's voice underscores the mystery and wonder of God's presence. Despite all the efforts to explain, interpret, and understand, the truth remains that God's communication with humanity is ultimately a mystery that transcends our comprehension. It is not something that can be fully explained or contained by human logic or experience. Rather, it is a gift, one that calls us to humility, reverence, and awe. The mystery of hearing God's voice invites believers into a deeper relationship with the divine, one that is rooted in trust, faith, and wonder at the ways in which God continues to speak, guide, and transform His people. In the end, hearing God's voice is more than just a spiritual experience. It is a doorway to a deeper, more intimate relationship with the Creator, one that changes the way we see the world and our place in it. Whether heard in moments of stillness or in the midst of life's chaos, God's voice remains a profound reminder of His presence, love, and guidance. The mystery of how and why God chooses to speak to us may never be fully understood, but the impact of these experiences on our faith and lives is undeniable. It is a mystery that invites us to listen, to trust, and to follow the voice that calls us into His divine purpose. Continuing the exploration of hearing God's voice, another profound aspect of this phenomenon is how it challenges the human understanding of divine interaction. We often think of God's communication as being mediated through sacred texts, prophets, or prayers. However, hearing God's voice directly brings an immediacy and personal intimacy to the experience. It compels believers to consider a more direct and tangible relationship with the divine, where God is not distant, but actively involved in the details of our lives. This sense of closeness may deepen one's trust in God, pushing them to view their faith as a living, dynamic relationship rather than a static belief system. An important feature of hearing God's voice is its potential to reveal aspects of ourselves that we may not be fully aware of. Often, when people claim to have heard God speak to them, they report that the voice provided a deep sense of personal revelation. God's voice might point out areas of one's life that need transformation, reveal personal weaknesses, or expose hidden fears. Such revelations, while challenging, are transformative. They allow the individual to confront their limitations, acknowledge personal shortcomings, and take proactive steps toward growth and healing. This process of divine self-examination may be uncomfortable, but it is essential for spiritual maturity. The voice of God, then, becomes a tool for spiritual refinement, a way of refining the soul through guidance and correction. Moreover, hearing God's voice can significantly alter one's perspective on suffering and hardship. When God speaks in moments of distress or pain, the experience can reframe suffering, making it feel purposeful or redemptive. For those going through trials, hearing God's voice can provide a sense of hope and encouragement, letting them know that their struggles are not in vain. This can shift their approach to suffering, transforming it from a burden into a source of spiritual growth and a deeper understanding of God's presence in adversity. In these moments, the voice of God serves not only as a source of comfort but as a guide through dark times, helping individuals navigate challenges with renewed strength and faith. The concept of hearing God's voice also invites believers to consider the spiritual discipline of attentiveness. In a world that encourages constant busyness and distraction, taking time to listen for God's voice requires a conscious decision to slow down and quiet the noise around us. It's about creating space in our lives to be present with God and open to His whispers. This practice of attentiveness, often cultivated through prayer, meditation, and reflection, is foundational to spiritual growth. It teaches us to quiet our internal chatter and external distractions long enough to recognize the voice of God when it comes, allowing us to cultivate a more profound sense of divine intimacy. Furthermore, the act of hearing God's voice often leads to a deeper sense of responsibility. When God speaks to individuals, especially in moments of clarity or calling, there is typically an invitation to act. This may involve specific instructions on how to serve others, make difficult life decisions, or pursue a calling that aligns with God's purpose. The voice of God can act as a catalyst for change, propelling individuals into action. Those who heed this call often find themselves in positions where they are called to make sacrifices or take bold steps in their lives, trusting that the guidance they received is leading them toward a greater good. This responsibility isn't always easy to bear, but it brings with it a sense of fulfillment and alignment with a higher purpose. Another fascinating aspect of hearing God's voice is its impact on one's relationship with the world at large. When individuals hear a divine call, especially one that emphasizes love, justice, or compassion, it can shift their worldview. The voice of God often compels people to see beyond themselves, calling them to care for the marginalized, stand for justice, or engage in acts of kindness and service. In this way, hearing God's voice can lead to a deeper commitment to social and moral causes, driving individuals to participate in creating a better world. The voice becomes not just a personal revelation but a challenge to engage in collective action, turning spiritual insight into real-world impact. On a theological level, hearing God's voice also brings into question the nature of divine communication in relation to the concept of free will. When individuals hear God's voice, they are often faced with a choice. Do they follow the guidance provided, or do they resist and continue on their current path? The experience of hearing God's voice highlights the balance between divine sovereignty and human freedom. While God's voice offers direction, it is still up to the individual to make a conscious decision to respond. This tension between divine guidance and human agency underlines the importance of spiritual discernment and personal responsibility. The voice of God invites obedience, but the choice to follow is ultimately a personal one, reflecting the autonomy given to each individual. In addition, the experience of hearing God's voice also touches on the broader question of divine will versus human desires. When God speaks to an individual, especially in moments where a difficult decision is required, it often brings about a struggle between one's own ambitions and God's will. This may prompt a person to question their life goals, career choices, or relationships, as they are invited to align their desires with God's greater plan. The tension that arises from this process is often the catalyst for profound personal transformation, as it leads individuals to reevaluate their priorities and seek a path that better reflects God's purposes. Lastly, hearing God's voice can foster a deeper sense of spiritual humility. Those who claim to have had this experience often report a renewed sense of awe and reverence, recognizing that the God who spoke to them is both infinitely powerful and intimately present. This humbling realization encourages gratitude and worship, as it becomes clear that hearing God's voice is not something one can achieve through personal effort alone, but rather a divine gift of grace. The experience serves as a reminder of God's sovereignty, His love for His creation, and His desire to engage with humanity on a deeply personal level. This sense of divine proximity nurtures a humble heart, one that is open to God's guidance and willing to surrender to His will. In conclusion, the experience of hearing God's voice is multifaceted, rich with spiritual, psychological, and theological dimensions. Whether it brings comfort, guidance, correction, or transformation, it continues to be one of the most profound and life-altering experiences for those who encounter it. Through this intimate form of communication, believers are invited into a deeper, more meaningful relationship with the divine, marked by trust, obedience, and a willingness to change. Hearing God's voice invites individuals into a journey of spiritual growth that challenges them to live with purpose, compassion, and faith, and to be a beacon of light and hope for the world around them.